Welcome to the Arise Truth Radio program. If you're joining us via Facebook, YouTube, Truth FM, or the GBN app, we're grateful that you can be with us this afternoon. Today we're going to be looking at the topic of love versus lust. So if it is nearby, get your Bible, pen, paper, and study with us for the next hour, the greatest of all books, the inspired, inerrant, perfect will of God. Thank you for being with us. We'll start here shortly.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Arise to Truth radio program. We're coming to you live from the studios on the campus of the Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development. This program is a work of the Stony Creek Church of Christ. We're very thankful that you've made a decision to tune in today to join us. Hopefully you'll participate in our study as we study the topic of lust versus love. We're going to look at this topic concerning lust and love from the viewpoint of the greatest book ever known to man, the inspired, inerrant, perfect will of God. My name is Tony Haas, and we have with us today.
I'm Jacob Martin, and I serve as the minister at the Centerview Church of Christ over in Elizabethton, Tennessee.
My name is Ethan Tate. I'm the Dean of Media here at the Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development, also as one of the instructors here, and I also serve as the minister at the Rogersville Church of Christ in Rogersville, Tennessee.
And my name is Bill Haywood, and I serve as the director for the Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development. Also in the studio is Clayton Stewart, who takes care of all things technical, and we appreciate him, and we appreciate all of these men, and we certainly do appreciate you as well. And we hope you'll get your Bibles out, get a piece of paper and a pencil, and take some notes. We're going to be talking about a subject that is of vital importance to everyone in our culture. We'll open up our phone lines here in a few minutes after we introduce the topic. And so you guys remind me to give out the phone number in a few moments, or one of you give it out. But today we're going to be talking about the subject of love versus lust. We need to understand God's design for love, the biological desire, and the path that leads away from that which is holy and pure and honorable. Now, someone may ask the question, why does this even matter? Well, consider Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4. There, the writer would say, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Do you realize that here we're being told there are some people who are going to stand condemned before God because they were fornicators and idolaters? Now, you might say, Bill, I thought you were talking about love and lust. Let me tell you, friends, if there was the proper type of love, there would not be fornication and adultery. If there was not a lust, there would not be fornication and adultery. I've got a picture on my computer here. Jacob was just looking at it, and it's a road sign that says, hell for certain road. And the reality is that there are certain roads that you get on. I know where you're headed. Now, I don't know the story behind this particular road sign. I've heard all types of legends. I'll actually be over in Kentucky. That road sign is over in Kentucky, and I'll be over in that area, and I intend while I'm there to try to figure out, okay, what's the history behind this? But guys, here's the reality. There's some people that get on a road, and if they stay on that road, I know where they're going to be headed. Hell for certain. Tony, in Matthew 16, verse number 26, Jesus asks two very powerful questions. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And the reality of that, Tony, is that there are many people that will give that which is worth nothing for their very soul, for their eternity with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah, people are and I think part of the problem is our society today is so easily accepting any type of relationship sexually because who am I to tell you that you're wrong? And that's what they'll ask. Who are you to tell me I'm wrong? Well, God is the one who tells us or sets the standard, doesn't he? All licentious activities in life, all violations of Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, are going to be severely punished by God. And that's why it matters. It's not me or anyone else in this room or anyone else anywhere in this world trying to guide or rule you or tell you what to do. We want to protect and safeguard lost souls or souls that are in danger, and that's the problem. And so the sins that are referred to here are very prevalent in our life. And listen, this is nothing new. It prevailed in the days of Jesus, the Son of God. It prevailed in the days of the first century church. Why else are they talking about it? Because it was a prevalent activity. And so they prevail everywhere in the world. And so it's important for us to set our priorities straight and know what it is that God wants us to do or doesn't want us to do.
Let me say this, guys. I think there's a tendency on the part of some people to think, now I can see how a weak person would fall into the sin of fornication or adultery. Let me ask you this question. What do these men have in common? Former President Bill Clinton, golf professional Tiger Woods, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former actor and governor of California, General Petraeus, Rudy Giuliani. What do they all have in common? There are some other ones too. What about King David? What about David's son, Amnon? What about King Solomon? What about Samson? What about King Herod? Guys, these were really strong men. These were powerful men. These are not wimps. But all of them face spiritual failure, broken relationships, and lasting consequences as a result of it. So we're not talking about people, Ethan, that are just weak-minded people. We've all got to be aware of the fact that this is something that can face any man or any woman.
Absolutely. When you look at the word itself, it's two words in the Greek. It's the idea of on and intense desire. So when you have an intense desire on something, this word can mean many things. You look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse number 17, and Paul would say, we have a great desire to see the brethren there in Thessalonica. That term is also used if you look in Galatians chapter 2, or Galatians 5 and verse 24, where Paul would say that we are to crucify the body with its passions and desires. Same word that Paul had used in a positive light back in the Thessalonian letter is now used in a negative light. And what we're talking about in and of itself, in using one's desire in the appropriate design that God made it for. You had mentioned Hebrews 13:4, and you had just mentioned the idea of controlling. There is nothing weak about controlling oneself. Even faith, we are to add to our faith, 2 Peter 1, self-control. So if we control ourselves and the passions of our life the way that God desires, then we can be the kind of people that God desires us to be. Jacob?
Yeah, with this whole topic of love versus lust, people do not fall into lust because they lack the strength. Bill gave the examples of people in the Bible, very renowned men in the Bible, David, Samson, Solomon. They seemed to be very strong, but they failed to manage their desires. None of us are the great exception. This is a temptation that any of us can fall victim to, whether we have a strong mind or we have a weak mind, and it's easy to be tempted by this. Proverbs chapter 6, Solomon made this warning. Bill's notes, he starts in verse 27. I'm going to go up to 25 to establish the context a little more. Solomon says, "Do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. For by means of a harlot a man is reduced to a crust of bread, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. Can a man take fire to his bosom, and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals, and his feet not be seared? So is he who goes in to his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent." That could be anybody. That's what Solomon is saying here. Whether one is strong, one is weak, anyone, if the temptation is there, they'll be led away, and there'll be damaging consequences as a result of it.
Well, that's exactly right. And you know, guys, I think that there is this idea that, well, that could never happen to me.
Yeah.
Well, that would never happen to me. But what's Paul saying in 1 Corinthians 16 and verse number 12, or excuse me, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12?
Let every man take heed.
Yeah, take heed to
Therefore,
yourself.
He's saying, take heed lest he fall.
So here I am. I'm the guy that says, oh, I'm going to stand. We better watch out. The reality is, and we've talked about it on this program before, any of us in this room, anyone that's listening to us, you're capable of the most vile and disgusting sins that you could imagine. And here's the problem. It gets back to that road sign that says hell for certain road. There's certain roads you get on. You know, I don't really believe that people wake up, one day they live a godly, righteous life, and the next day they get up and they say, I'm going to be a complete reprobate. It happens little steps at a time. And if you start taking those little steps down hell for certain road, you can get to the point that you could do things that you would not imagine. A little bit later, assuming we have time, we're going to talk about David. I'm convinced David did things that earlier in his life he never believed he was capable of doing. And so it's really important for us to think about this. Before I move on to something else, you look like you got something to say there.
You go ahead.
Well, I was going to move on to talking about the culture in which we live. We live in a sexually charged culture. And, it's an amazing thing. Rhonda and I were in a major city last week, and we walked through a big department store. And maybe it's because I've been thinking about this subject. I was really shocked. They had signs in there as you walk through the various departments. I mean, just walking down the main aisle, and they had signs in there that were really just over-the-top sexualized pictures for everything from clothing to jewelry to, toiletries, everything you can think about, and it was just all sexualized pictures. We live in that kind of culture where the advertisers try to grab your attention. Now, here's what's really interesting. There's a book out, and I'm not saying it's the only book, but it's one that I'm very familiar with, written by two researchers. It's called Hooked, and it talks about the reality of what happens during what's so-called casual sex. And they establish some really interesting things that happen. And one of the big things that they pointed out is that more happens during sex than a physical activity. But guys, Jesus knew this a long time ago, did he not? So researchers are finding this amazing, that sex is more than physical activity. Think about what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 28, and then I'll throw it over to you, Tony. Jesus said, "But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So adultery, he's saying, begins in the heart or the spiritual mind, and it's what we think about. And so it's so important that we stop that behavior before we get to that point, and we realize, man, this is a major problem in our culture.
So Jesus said it first, didn't he?
Oh, he did.
He tells us all about what scientists are just now figuring out. So I think we could safely say this: it's not enough to say no to a temptation. I've got to say yes to Jesus.
Matter of fact, let me say this, Tony, because when you said that, it made me think of something else. I think there was a time when we didn't have the science, and there may have been people that weren't even really good Bible students, but common sense told them, oh, I know how this works.
Oh, yeah.
I know how this works. I know it's more than the physical act. But somewhere along the line, our society's become sophisticated, and it's just sex, just a casual thing. And what they've done is they've dumbed down humanity. We're just a bunch of animals. It's just sex.
Okay, so if you bring a man and you bring him down to a state of an animal, you can sell him anything. What's that old saying? Sex sells. That's why they do what you have described for us. But here is the danger. I'm going all the way back to the book of Proverbs. And I'm not going to read the text, but I'm going to give you some information here from chapter 5. What does this type of activity do to a man? Number one, it robs you of your honor. Mm-hmm. Verse 9 of chapter 5, if you're involved in these things, you lose your honor. Verse 10, you're going to lose your wealth. Do not think, men, or women, that your spouse won't take you for everything you've got if they catch you in these activities. So it's possible. Certainly, with disease, verse 11, you could lose your health. You could shorten your life. Certainly, if none of these happen to you, in my mind, here's that same mind, I'm losing self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm no longer the man that I once was. And then verse 14, after all of this is said and done, I lose my reputation. I once knew of a man who was an alcoholic. His son called me after being gone and missing for 3 or 4 days, wanted me to come get him. I went and got this 15-year-old boy. You want to answer that?
All right, we got a call.
We'll come back.
All right. Arise to Truth, you're on the air.
I've got a question for you.
Okay.
If two single people come together and have sex, do they become one flesh? And here's the second part of my question. If two single people come together and have sex and the girl gets pregnant, are they definitely one flesh and not married? I'd like to hear y'all's thought on that.
Let me get that last one. Are they one flesh and not married? Is that what you said? Okay, I guess
That was his question.
I think that was
if they come together and have a child.
Let me share some scripture on that I think is really significant. And we're going to address the. Well, also, I want to address something regarding marriage there. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18 and 19, there's a very serious warning. There, Paul writes, flee sexual immorality. For every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. So one of the things that's mentioned here is the reality that there's something really serious that happens. Now, people say, sin is sin, and it really doesn't matter what you do. And I'm going to back up here to verse 16 in just a moment. But here's the reality I want you to see. When it comes to our standing with God, the least of the least of the least sins as we count it, and I realize that's just the way we look at it, will damn your soul to hell if it's not covered by the blood of Jesus. But there are certain sins that have a greater consequence on the individual and on society. That's the reason why when God had a perfect government under the nation of Israel, that there were certain capital crimes for perverse sexual behavior, because he realized a society would not stand if these things were running rampant. Well, if you back up to verse number 16, there Paul, we'll back it up to verse 15. Do you not know your bodies are members of Christ? So then shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a harlot? Certainly not. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a harlot is one body with her? For the two, he says, shall become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. Now, let me stop right there. Just taking that right there, there is a sense that in the intimacy of a sexual relationship, there is a oneness. And there is tremendous, tremendous danger in this, because there are also, and if we have time, we'll talk about this later. Science has told us some things that happen in intimacy, not just, even just what we would consider to be minor intimacy, that there are some things happening on a neurohormonal level where there's a bonding. What a terrible thing to be bonded. I'm talking about emotionally bonded to a prostitute. Now, is that a sin? Yes. Are there great consequences for that? Yes. And let's say that it's not a prostitute, it's just, maybe it's a friend, and there's a pregnancy. Well, you know what? There's an added responsibility now for that child. In this sense, they become one flesh through the sexual act, but that does not mean that they're married, okay? What that means is that intimacy has bonded them together, and that bond can be broken, and it is a painful thing that happens. It's one of the reasons why it's so funny to hear people talk about the idea of casual sex. and you find people that have engaged in what they consider to be casual sex, and they have all types of emotional problems because they think they're smart enough to just say, oh, this is no big deal.
Bill, that bond can be broken, right?
Oh, that bond can
Because verse 16 says what? Flee fornication.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But here's the reality of it. And we'll go ahead and talk about it right now. Over in Matthew 19:9, he says, so let a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, or be joined to his wife. That term has the idea of gluing together. Now, here's what we know today. There are some things that happen in intimacy, and we got to be ever so careful because you can have a level of bonding from a man hugging a woman, and under the right circumstances. You got to be ever so careful from this. The woman has a hormonal dump of oxytocin. The man has a hormonal dump of vasopressin, and it causes them to be bonded together. Now, God did this because he knew that he needed to bond a husband and wife together. But now listen to me. I'm not talking about the act, but the hormones. The hormones are judgment neutral. I'm not talking about the act. In other words, those hormones, you might think in your brain, now I know this is no big deal. Your hormones don't know that. And you can be bonded to someone you have no reason to be bonded to. Now, can that bond be broken? Yeah, but I will tell you, it will be painful. And I think this is the idea that Paul has here. You've probably been in a church where you've seen the arches that go up, and we don't grow trees like that. What they do is they take different pieces of wood and they glue them together, and they're called glued laminated arches. And when it's done properly, engineers tell us the glue line will not break. Actually, the wood will break before the glue line breaks. Now, I'm going to share with you a very silly illustration, but I think you'll see why I'm sharing this silly illustration. Imagine with me, let's say you're watching the program today over one of our video mediums, and I pull up a gallon of super glue, and I pull out a brush, and I start saying, well, this is what happens when in intimacy, and I paint my hand with super glue, and then I slap both my hands together, and boy, I mean that, and I hold them there, and I talk about being bonded together, and then a few minutes later, 6 minutes later, after I'm done filibustering, I try to get my hands apart. They won't come apart. And so I get Jacob on one arm and Tony on the other arm, and then Ethan on one arm, and then Clayton on the other arm, and the four of them are pulling, and my hands start coming apart. But it's not glue separating from glue. It's flesh separating from flesh. In Malachi 2, he talks about the one who divorces covers his garment with violence. I don't necessarily believe that means that the husband and wife were going to blows with one another, but if you know anything about divorce and you've been around divorced people, it is a violent act, and it tears one's heart to pieces. And see, so you're talking about marriage right now. Okay, well, let's take it back. That bonding, you can bond with a reprobate. You can bond with an idiot. And you've got to be ever so careful. And I think this is the idea here that he's talking about when he says that if we commit this sin, you've committed a sin against your own body, and the consequences are going to be so great and painful. Yes, you can get away from it. Furthermore, 1 John 1 and verse 9, we can be forgiven for that, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be a scar.
I'll just let you have it, but I'll ask this question. Isn't that exactly what the writer of Proverbs is talking about when he writes to his son?
Yeah.
He's not talking about a marriage situation. He's talking about this ungodly bonding.
That's right. There's a couple of examples to consider how the Bible deals or how it approaches these situations. Genesis 38, you see Judah and Tamar. Obviously, Tamar's husband has died. Judah, he's married, but there's a child that's conceived from that interaction. It does not call them married when she has Perez and Zerah. When you look into 2 Samuel chapter 11, and you look at David and Bathsheba, even though both of them were married, there was a child that was conceived, but even during the time the child was conceived, it said she was still the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So having sex does not consummate a marriage. And I know the caller had said, what about two single people? Well, there's an interesting idea in Genesis 19 when you look at Lot's two daughters, and Lot has lost his wife. The marriage bond is gone, and you had the birth of Moab and Ammon, but it doesn't say they were married after doing that. So, and even the principle, if you want to say, well, those are Old Testament examples. Well, if you look at Matthew 19, Jesus said, have you not read in the beginning that he made them male and female, going back to Genesis 2:24, and the two became one flesh? Well, that tells me that the principles of marriage were established from the beginning in creation, and it gives me some of the principles to take into consideration in the beauty of the language of sex within the marriage realm. But then even if people violate that boundary, doing certain actions does not demand that a marriage has been, quote unquote, consummated. That is a different idea, which is what you are presenting. So as per the caller, it does not make a marriage bond.
Really a foreign idea to the scriptures of a marriage being consummated.
Yeah.
There are people who believe that if that hasn't happened, the marriage hasn't been rubber stamped. That's not true. Let me say this, and I'll throw it over to you, Jake. Let me just say this one thing while we're here. It's a little off topic, but I think it fits. Marriage has to be intentional. That applies to what we're talking about, but it also, when I lived in Texas, people would say, matter of fact, a lot of times, one individual would say, we're in a common law marriage. The other individual didn't necessarily feel that way. The wife might say, well, we're married common law. That means you've been shacked up so long that, for the protection, whatever protection, the state says, okay, you're in a common law marriage. You don't get married by accident. There has to be intentionality. Okay, here's another caller. Arise to Truth, you're on the air.
I wasn't saying that two single people getting together, having sex or having a baby consummated any marriage.
No, we understood that. We were just adding on to the subject.
Yeah. I didn't think that they're going through the same acts as married people would do. And as far as like King David, he did have sex with, what was her name? Bathsheba.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The first baby, God took the baby away from him through death. Then I think he obviously took her as a wife after Uriah the Hittite got killed.
Right.
Because he had, did he have Absalom or not Absalom, but Solomon from her. So, I mean, this life we live in down here is so screwed up. It's pitiful the way I look at it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, I will agree with the caller that we're living in a mixed up, messed up world. The only answer we have, Jacob, is the gospel. Because without the gospel, people will relegate themselves to the level of animals and act like animals.
Yeah, absolutely. The gospel is what brings people to salvation. Going back to what the caller was asking, only God is the one that's able to join two people together in accordance with his marriage laws. That was something Wesley Simons taught us intensely when he taught marriage, divorce, and remarriage, and that's something I greatly remembered even long after his passing. And the same thing applies with his divorce laws as well. I think of in Mark chapter 6 when Herod took his brother Philip's wife, Herodias. John the Baptist criticized that decision. He said to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Why did he say that? Because he took her unlawfully, and the two were in an adulterous relationship. So just because people want to come together does not mean they are joined together in the sight of God. The Bible warns so many things about the dangers of lust and sexual immorality. Bill, you brought up Matthew 5:28 earlier. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. How even science supports that. I think living in this culture where things are sexually obsessed and people are obsessed with these provocative images and images and everything that causes people to lust and chase after one another. It's fascinating. This past Sunday, I preached a lesson on modesty and what a Christian should wear and what people should dress in general. And I think this whole aspect of lust and dressing immodestly actually goes very hand in hand, because what usually happens when somebody is dressed in an immodest way, well, it does lead to lust. So in Proverbs chapter 7, we read of a woman described as a crafty harlot. Proverbs 7 verse 10, a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. This man was drawn away because she was attractive, but I think also because of the way she was dressed. And if you go to the end of the chapter, it says that an arrow struck his liver as a bird hastens to the snare, and he did not know it would cost his life. Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. So this is a very dangerous thing to go around, to try to live a life according to what God wants and be tempted by the things that are in this culture. So we must always be that the best example we can be, and not only to be right in the sight of God, but also to influence others to make the right decisions as well.
Well, you're exactly right. Let's think for a little bit, and we'll do this real quick. Let's define our terms. Let's talk about love. Let's talk about lust, and let's talk about adultery. When we talk about love, in the English language, we have one word for love, and we love apple pie, and we love our mom, and we love baseball, and we love the sunset, and we love our country. And the Greek language, there were 4 words. 3 of them appeared in the New Testament. Eros, which is romantic love. Philia, or phileo, which is the idea of a deep, affectionate friendship. And in John 11:3, Lazarus was one that Jesus loved. He had a deep, affectionate friendship. Storge, which is a family love. Paul talks about that in Romans 12 and verse 10, where he says, be kindly affectionate. And he actually combines friendship with family. It says phileo storgos. But I think it's really interesting. I'll just mention this over in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 3. He talks about unloving, against natural affections. And he uses an A to negate storgos. We do that. A theist is someone who believes in God. An atheist is someone who does not believe in God. And there he talks about astorgos. They do not have natural affection. And then there's agape, which is a selfless, sacrificial, unconditional love that seeks the good of others. And that's what we should be striving for, is to thinking about what's best for someone else. What's the idea of lust? To covet after something outside God's design. Then we have the idea of adultery, sexual relationships, a man with a married woman other than his spouse. And then we would say that fornication is to engage in unauthorized sexual relations. And we don't have to run through all these, but guys, when we look down at the contrast between these, and I'll just mention 1 or 2, and then you guys can mention anything you want to. But when we think about the highest level of love compared to lust, one of the things that love does is focuses on the other person. What's in their best interest? Lust, in contradistinction, I'm focused on self. What do I want? How can I satisfy myself? The interesting thing about love is it leads to fulfillment. We'll look at some examples of this in a moment. Lust, on the other hand, Tony, leads to frustration.
It sure does. Love as well brings satisfaction. We're talking about true satisfaction. That satisfaction that the Bible speaks of, long term. Whereas lust says this: I've got to have more, more, more. It's like a drug in the mind, and it tells you you've got to continue to do this thing. And then love encourages self-control, where I look at a situation, I know it's wrong, and I say to myself, no, I'm not going to be involved in that, because first of all, I care enough about me. And here's something else, folks. When you involve yourself in a situation where you shouldn't be, you don't love that other person. If you really love that other person, you would exercise self-control. Lust seeks to enslave rather than bring about the idea of self-control. Jacob?
And there's other things, too, that factor in. Biblical love desires to live faithfully. We're told to be faithful unto death. And when, depending on any aspect of love, whether it's the love of our brethren, the love of spouse, We desire to do what's right in the sight of God, whereas lust, on the other hand, desires to gratify self. Me. What do I need to do to be happy? And when people have that lust in them, especially in regards to sexual pleasures, it always leads to destruction. We also see that love honors Christ. When we do what God wants us to do, Christ is honored, but lust excludes Christ. Many times when people lust, they forget about God and what's commanded in His Word because they're all focused on self-gratification. Love prevents sin. When we remember what God wants us to do, we're not going to be perfect, but we're going to strive to walk in the light and not sin willfully, whereas somebody who lusts entices with evil desires, like all evil is on his mind, and having that attitude without having a repentant heart causes nothing but destruction.
You know, and even going along with that, love is the attitude of committing to the other. You know, there's a book that a lot of people steer away from because, well, everybody has their own reasons for it. But there's a reason why Song of Solomon is in our Bible. And it is not just, in essence, a book about marriage, though it greatly applies to marriage. It is the display of the changes in a relationship that is built on love in every facet of the word. So when someone is anxious on one side of the relationship, the book also shows how the companion helps to comfort the one who is anxious, in terms of complimenting one another and finding the good things in one another and helping one another to grow. The book of Song of Solomon shows how that commitment to one another can flourish in the way it states early in the book, when the cedars on the house are green, and then when there is the time of new and old scents or seasons that are moving through the relationship. So really, in the ideal essence of relationships and a godly love, Song of Solomon is a beautiful book in displaying how that plays out. But if we look at the opposite side of it, I mean, just take the complete opposite of the book of Song of Solomon. That is a book about lust in that point. So if we're looking at the biblical concept of love, especially moving into the New Testament, you know, the greatest image of love, as displayed by Paul when he compares it to the marriage relationship, he says in Ephesians 5, look at Christ in the church. You know, you begin in verse number 25 of Ephesians 5. It would say, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church. And he gave himself for her that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies, for he who loves himself or loves his wife, loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does his church. So if we look at the ideal essence of love, love is, from the sense of Christ, a sacrificial style of love, and that's the agape style of love. Notice the phrase, he gave himself for her. It's very similar to the language when we look at Romans chapter 5 and verse number 8, where God sent Jesus for us. In fact, it would say, but God demonstrates his own love for us in that while we were yet sinners, yet Christ died for us. So there is the essence within the marriage relationship. There's a beautiful display of love between Christ and the church. But then you look at the type of love that God has for all mankind in sending Jesus. That also is a grand display of what love is. Now, think of what lust is in comparison with those things. Everything's all about me. I'm selfish. I don't want to do a thing for you. That would be the opposite of Ephesians 5. But what about Romans chapter 5 and verse number 8? Well, I don't care about anyone else. I just want to do what helps get me further in life, even if it destroys the lives of others around me. That's not love. That's lust.
You know, there's a lot of places we could look. 1 Corinthians 13 gives us the characteristics of love. But I want you to look down at Genesis chapter 37 for just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. And we won't be able to read this whole passage, but you might be familiar with Joseph. His brothers have sold him into slavery into Egypt. He is a servant in Potiphar's house, and he has risen, and he has great authority in Potiphar's house. And there's one thing, though, that is not under his authority, and that's Potiphar's wife. And he knows that. And he doesn't want Potiphar's wife, but Potiphar's wife wants him. And she pursues him and tries to seduce him. And he not only resists that, but I want you to think about something. And I would argue that this is a demonstration of great love. He could have given in to lust. He could have slept with Potiphar's wife, but instead he says to her, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He also recognizes his master. I believe he's demonstrating love for his master. He's demonstrating love for God, his master. And he says, I can't do this. So you see, one of the great tools that we can use to overcome lust is love. If we really love God and we really love others, we don't want to do that. Now, guys, let's drop down and talk a little bit about David and Bathsheba. And we've been talking about love. Now we'll talk about lust. And when we look at David and Bathsheba, what a sad story this is. I'm always amazed when you look at David's life up to 2 Samuel 11. It is like just one constant upward trajectory. And I mean, it's just, he is so good. It's just unbelievable. As a matter of fact, earlier in his life, King Saul is so horrible, and other people are, and he is just always so good and trying to do the right thing. And 2 Samuel 11 is the time when kings go out to war. And I don't want to make too much of that, but it really seems like the writer is making a point here that in 2 Samuel chapter 11, that there's something odd about this, because everybody goes out to war, and then verse number 2 begins, or the text says, it happened in the spring of the year at the time when kings go out to war, that David sent Joab his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rahab. Now look at the last phrase in verse number 1. But David remained at Jerusalem. I don't know why he remained at Jerusalem, but it really seems like he was at the wrong place. I know there is a sense in which he was at the wrong place. And that night he went up on his roof. Maybe he couldn't sleep. And he sees a woman bathing. And he should have got away immediately. But apparently he fixed his gaze on her. And the text says she's a beautiful woman. And he inquired about her. And he sent for her. And they had sexual relations. And later a baby was conceived as a result of that adulterous relationship. He tries to cover it up because he doesn't want her husband to know. His husband is one of David's warriors. So he calls the husband to come in to check on things, and then he sends the husband, says, go home, spend the night with your wife. He thinks he'll think this is his baby. The husband won't do it. So the next morning when David finds out the husband didn't go home, he inquires, he said, I can't go home. God's people are out to war, and, you know, the Ark of the Covenant's in a tent. I'm not going to do that. So David gets him drunk, tries to send him home. He still won't go home. So then David sends him home with his own death warrant. He gives him a note to take to Joab that says, you put Uriah at the front of the battle when it's the hottest moment of the battle, and then you have everybody pull back. That was just a convenient way to murder Uriah. And as a result of that, Uriah's dead, and David's committed adultery. And there's a lot of things, guys, that David saw that night on the rooftop. But there's some tragic things he did not see.
Yeah, he didn't see, first of all, that idleness was his enemy.
Oh, isn't that the truth?
Yeah. David didn't see that idleness is a devil's workshop. Matthew chapter 25, verse 24 through 30. You imagine that. It seems like even as a child, even into my adult life, every time I got in trouble is when I was just sitting around doing nothing. When I should have been doing something.
You want to find something to do, don't you?
Yeah. And listen, Satan's going to provide you something to do. Be careful. We sing that song, be careful, little eyes, what you see, little hands, what you do, little feet, where you go. Satan will lead you in the wrong place. David, neither did he see the need to guard his own heart. That's a man at this point in his life, he seems to be self-reliant. I can take care of myself. Isn't that when we get ourselves in trouble? When we think that we can stand on our own, despite the warning of Jesus? Take heed lest you fall. We need to be cautious and think about these things. David didn't see that a baby would be the result of his adulterous actions. He thought he would have sexual relations and no one would ever be the wiser of it. A baby was born, or was going to be born, and he had to hide that to save his own, his own pride. Or his own honor. He couldn't let people find out that he, the king, had done such a thing. People are going to find out. David didn't see that it would be possible, it would not be possible, rather, to cover up his sin. And listen, you can't hide sin. Bill, I might hide it from you, but I can't hide it from God.
You can't hide it from you.
No, and that's the hard part, because you said something to me one day, it's been a couple of years ago, we were talking about people and sinning. You will live with your sin the rest of your life. And it will know it. And I don't care if you ask God for forgiveness. If I've sinned against a woman and I've had relations with her, every time I think of her name, every time I see her face, even if I've asked forgiveness and I've done what I should to restore myself back to the kingdom, I'm still going to be bothered by that act and what I've done to her, myself, God, all others involved.
Now, let me just be clear to our listeners. We believe that God can forgive you, and I don't buy this stuff that we need to learn how to forgive ourselves. We need to learn to believe God. If God says, I've forgiven you, we're forgiven. However, that scar, there's still a scar.
Yeah, you're not going to get rid of it.
Boy, I mean, so we have to be ever so careful about that.
Jacob?
Yeah, going back to that, the scar that's left when Nathan told the parable about the ewe lamb and how that pricked David's heart. And Nathan said, "Thou art the man." In chapter 12 of 2 Samuel, in 2 Samuel, it says, verse 10, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun, for you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel before the sun." You go in later in 2 Samuel, I believe it's chapter 17, one of those chapters, his son Absalom, when Absalom was trying to stage a coup against David, and David went off, and he went off to protect himself with his men, and Absalom was trying to take the throne. He left his concubines in there, and Absalom slept with David's concubines in the sight of all Israel, which was fulfilled in this text that God warned David about. And not only that, but his children were very rebellious people. Besides Absalom, who did the disgraceful thing of sleeping with his father's concubines, David's other son, Amnon, he had an obsession with his sister named Tamar in 2 Samuel chapter 13, so much so that he faked an illness, had her bring food to him, and then he sexually assaulted her. He raped her, essentially. And that led to some devastating consequences. His other brother killed him because he was upset about it. And, man, there was a mess in David's family, all because of this sin David committed with Bathsheba, which led to devastating effects.
Guys, do you think that every time one of these incidents occurred, David thought back to the rooftop?
Oh, it had to cut him to the heart.
Especially after it had been prophesied what was going to happen.
And let me say this. I'm sure it cut him to the heart, and I'm sure there are people that think, well, if I saw that woman, I'd lust for her too. That's the reason why Paul says, flee sexual immorality. You know what? Willpower is greatly overrated. It really, you got to have willpower and self-control. Willpower kicks in when you start running. Okay, you need, it's idiotic to say, well, I'm going to use willpower. I'm going to stand here and just gaze at that woman. No, don't be that foolish. That's moronic. No, willpower says, I'm going to get out of here. And that's what David should have done. And, I think about this story about Amnon. It's got to be one of the most tragic stories. David's story is horrible. But think about Amnon. His own sister, half-sister, is Absalom's sister. It's no wonder. And David did nothing about it. Why didn't he do something? Well, maybe David was thinking, well, I didn't do any better than him.
James tells us something, though, about running.
Oh, yeah.
You don't just run from sin, you run to God.
Yeah.
Folks, you want to avoid this. That's saying no, but saying yes to God.
I had someone say to me today, a wonderful, godly man who is doing just splendidly, and said years ago Wesley told him, and of course this is Bible. If your house is full of demons, you sweep the house, you better fill it up with something, or 7 more demons will come in and fill the house. He said years ago Wesley told him, if you're going to remove one thing, you better put something good back in its place. And man, that's not only biblical, that's so very important. And we just leave that vacuum there. And no, David, what would David say in Psalm 51? My sin is ever before me. Is that saying God couldn't forgive him? No, but those scars, there's a great poem. I don't have it memorized, but it's about a fence or an ambulance. And it talks about a dangerous cliff. And there was a debate among the people. Should we put a fence at the top of the cliff, or should we put an ambulance below? And it was a great debate. And people said, well, you better put an ambulance at the bottom because people are going to tumble over the cliff. And the more they talked about it, but what if we could stop them from tumbling over the cliff? Why not just put a fence up there? And so people say, what about the grace of God and the forgiveness of God? Hey, we believe that. We believe that with all our heart, soul, and mind. But we also know, just like there are physical scars, listen, I believe your child could take their hand, lay it on a hot stove for 10 seconds, survive that, and maybe get the use of their hand, but I think they're going to suffer for the rest of their life.
There's going to be a scar there.
There's going to be a scar. Why do that? Well, they can heal up. Well, that's just dumb, folks. You could go out and fornicate and steal and lie and do those things, and you can be forgiven. I believe that with all my heart, soul, and mind. But you're putting a stumbling block in front of you where, just like David, my sin is ever before me. Let's put up a fence and stop people from tumbling over the edge. Jake, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. Jump in, guys.
People say, just go ahead and do it and ask for forgiveness later. I feel like that's the golden ticket sentiment towards God. Really the biblical remedy in light of how we prevent lust and how we promote more of a heart that is filled with love for God and righteousness. Proverbs 4:23 demonstrates, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. In fact, even Paul continues to encourage how we can help keep our heart and to strengthen and grow our heart. Philippians 1:9-10, this I pray that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and in all discernment, that you may approve the things, note this, that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ. I want you to think about that passage and consider the saying. Just go ahead and do it and ask for forgiveness later. This says without offense till the day of Christ. This tells me, why not do the right thing first and make that your first commitment there. 1 Thessalonians 3:12 would say something similar. May the Lord make you increase and abound in love to one another and to all, just as we do to you. Interesting passage to go along with this when you look at 1 John 5, about verse 2 to about verse 4, it talks about, here we know that we love God when we keep his commandments, and not just we love God, but that we love the brethren. So in making the right choice to love God and do that which is right and keep our heart in the ways of God, then we'll be growing not just in God's grace, but we'll be growing in God's love.
Now let's think about this in contradistinction to lust. So love, there's a principle of love growing and blossoming and becoming greater. With lust, there's the law of diminishing return. You know, when you go get on the roller coaster, and I'm the youngest of the youngest children in my family, and my older siblings, and one brother in particular, 7.5 years older than me, he'd want to take me on all the scariest rides. And that first ride, you know, going down that roller coaster, I thought I was going to die, eyes closed, clenching, that had a death grip on that bar. And then he said, let's do it again. Okay, not so bad that time. By about the fourth time I was on that roller coaster, I mean, who cares about the bar? My hands are in the air and screaming with everybody else. But guess what? It became less and less of a big deal. You can, when you focus on self, and when you're continually wanting more, what happens is that lust has a high peak, and you get excitement out of that, but it starts to plummet. And to get up to that, and you'll never get back up to that again, you need more and more risky behavior. And think about the difference between love. Love grows, lust diminishes. And I have people say this to me in the past that I've talked to. I have people that have been involved in some really ungodly, risky behavior. And one individual, I asked him, I said, why are you doing this? And actually, this is the composite of several individuals. The answer was, it makes me feel alive. Well, let me tell you something. Unauthorized sexual behavior is not life. It's death.
That's right.
It's death. Now, we don't know that, but that's exactly what it is, guys.
Yeah. Proverbs 4, chapter 4, verse 23, keep your heart with all diligence. We have a responsibility to ensure that we keep ourselves from sin. And that word diligent is just so impressive to me. It demands that I put forth some effort. For out of this life, spring the issues of life. Again, Proverbs chapter 7, verse 6 through 9. For at the window of my house I looked through my lattice, and I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths, a young man devoid of understanding, passing along the streets near to her corner, and he looked the path to her house, in the twilight, in the evening, in the black of the night. Where do you think he was going? What do you think he was going to do when he got there? You know, this guy, he wasn't thinking about sin and how sin occurs. Sin occurs because he had a lust in his mind, and he didn't do anything about it except reel it in and want more of it. But I think about that example you gave, Bill, of the roller coaster is probably as good a one as I've ever heard. The more you ride that high, the less exciting it is. And so, you know, that's why pornography in various forms, that's why it is so addictive, and that's why it grows when you get started to the point where you're actually physically getting involved to satisfy that high want.
I think it was Ted Bundy that said he began with pornography. A lot of people that were involved in gross sexual immorality, they began looking at like Playboy and things like that, but it had to grow to keep that excitement. It had to grow and do more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's always a consequence that comes from sexual immorality and lust. And Proverbs chapter 7 ends, verses 25 through 27. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men. Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death, and that's something we need to avoid. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So we want to end this afternoon with a warning from God. Proverbs chapter 5, verse 21, for the ways of man are always before the eyes of the Lord, and he pondereth all his goings. God knows what we're doing. God knows what we're going through. We want to encourage you as listeners to consider God and remember his words. Keep yourself from iniquity. Don't die in sin. Do what God asks and live. Perhaps you need to know more about obeying the gospel. We encourage you to give us a call. Be willing to sit and talk with you at any time. We care about you so very much. So if you have a need, would like for us to discuss it with you, won't you give us a call, 512-9226. Thank you for joining us.
For those still viewing through Facebook, YouTube, or Truth FM, or later on GBN, thank you for listening to our program today. If you have any questions, feel free to call us in the studio. We'll be here for a few minutes afterwards. We'd be more than happy to talk to you and hear some of your thoughts or questions you may have. But if you're still interested and curious in the topic of love versus lust, why not consider going to the greatest of all books, the inspired, inerrant, perfect will of God, for more information. You know, we're greatly appreciative you've listened to us today. Why not join us again this coming Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. for the Arise Truth Radio program. Until we meet again next time, God be with you till we meet again.